Hello everyone, today I'm going to teach you about the criminal procedure of the judicial process. The objectives of the criminal prosecution are to protect society and to punish the wrongdoer by a fine or imprisonment. The steps in a criminal prosecution are arrest and initial appearance, preliminary hearing, formal charges, arraignment, and trial. A crime is an offense against the people. Once a law enforcement agency learns that a crime has been committed, the agency begins a criminal prosecution. The first step in a criminal prosecution is to gather evidence of the crime and identify all possible suspects. When the law enforcement agency is convinced that it has ample evidence of both the crime and the identity of the suspect, an arrest warrant is issued and the suspect is arrested. At the time of arrest, the defendant must be informed of his or her rights. One of the principal rights of the accused is the right to be represented by counsel. This right is guaranteed by the 16th Amendment of the Constitution. Another important right is the right to remain silent, which is protected under the Fifth Amendment, which states that a criminal defendant cannot be compelled to be a witness against him or herself. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that the 14th Amendment to the Constitution requires that both the right to remain silent and the right to representation by counsel must also be protected by state governments. The defendant is then brought before a judge for an initial appearance, where once again the defendant is reminded of his or her rights. After this is where the preliminary hearing would take place. A preliminary hearing is a court procedure during which the judge decides whether a probable cause exists to continue holding the defendant for the crime. The government is represented by an attorney called the prosecutor. In some states, the government official is called the district attorney. During the preliminary hearing, the prosecution and the defendant are permitted to make arguments and call witnesses. The case will move on to the next step if there is probable cause to hold the defendant. If not, the defendant is set free. So that means the next step would be formal charges. In the United States, formal charges against a defendant may be brought either by indictment or by information. An indictment is a set of formal charges against a defendant issued by a grand jury. An information is a set of formal charges against a defendant drawn up and issued by the prosecutor or district attorney. Some states do not have a grand jury system and therefore can bring formal charges only by an information. In those states that use both, the indictment is usually used to bring formal charges for serious crimes. After this would be the arraignment. The arraignment is a formal court proceeding during which the defendant, after hearing the indictment or information read, pleads either guilty or not guilty. Should the defendant enter a guilty plea, a sentence may be imposed immediately. If the defendant enters a plea of not guilty, the case moves on to the trial. If the defendant has requested a jury trial, a jury is selected. After the jury has been seated, each side makes its opening statement. Opening statements are followed by the production of evidence by both the prosecution and the defendant. One very significant difference between a criminal trial and a civil trial is the burden of proof. In a civil trial, the plaintiff must prove his or her case by a preponderance of evidence. In contrast, in a criminal case, the prosecution must prove the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. As is the case with civil procedure, the criminal trial is completed by the attorney's closing statements and the judge's instructions to the jury. The jury members are then allowed to retire to deliberate and decide on a verdict. In most states, a defendant can be found guilty only by the unanimous agreement of all the jurors. A defendant who is found not guilty is released. One who has been found guilty is sentenced by the judge. Today I hope you learned and took away from this video and learned more about the criminal procedure. Thank you.